The day my sister-in-law threw a ceramic mug at my head and called it an accident, I finally understood that I had been living inside someone else's idea of what my life should look like. I was 31 when I married Adrian. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. I wasn't young and naive in the way people like to imagine when they hear stories like mine. I had a degree in accounting, a steady job at a firm in Mississauga, and my own one-bedroom apartment on the 11th floor with a view of the highway. I had built something. I knew exactly what I was doing when I said yes to him. Or at least, I thought I did. Adrian was charming in a very specific way, not flashy. Not the kind of charm that makes you suspicious. He was warm and steady, and he made you feel like he had thought about you very carefully. On our third date, he remembered that I mentioned, once in passing, that I hated cilantro, and he told the waiter before I even had a chance to look at the menu. I thought, this man pays attention. I thought that meant he cared. What I didn't understand then was that paying close attention to someone and caring about them are two completely different things. His mother lived 40 minutes away, in a house in Oakville that she had lived in since Adrian was 7 years old. His sister lived 10 minutes from that house. They were close in the way that some families are close, where proximity has become obligation, where love has calcified into loyalty, where no one ever really leaves. I met them both before the wedding and they were perfectly nice to me. His mother hugged me. His sister said she was so happy Adrian had finally found someone. I remember thinking, I like them. I remember thinking, this is going to be fine. We got married on a Saturday in September at a small venue in Burlington. 40 people, dinner, dancing. His cousin played guitar. It was genuinely one of the best nights of my life. And then the next morning we drove back to the house we had just bought together. A semi-detached in Hamilton, 2 bedrooms, a small backyard. And I started unpacking boxes, and his mother called. And Adrian talked to her for 45 minutes while I carried boxes in from the car alone. I told myself it was just the day after the wedding. Everyone was still excited. It would settle down. It didn't settle down. His mother called every single day. Sometimes twice. Adrian always picked up, always talked for as long as she wanted, always disappeared into the other room with his voice low like the conversation was private. When I asked him about it once, gently, he looked at me like I had said something slightly unreasonable. She's my mother, he said. And that was the end of it. His sister started coming over on weekends. At first it was nice. Sunday dinners, a bottle of wine, we'd watch a movie. But it slowly became something else. She had opinions about how we had arranged the furniture. She had opinions about what groceries we bought. She once opened our fridge, stood there for a long moment and said, Adrian, you really need to start eating better. He laughed. I was the one buying and cooking the food. I work in accounting. I'm good at noticing when numbers don't add up. I started noticing the same thing about my marriage about 18 months in. Adrian and I had merged our finances when we bought the house. Joint account for household expenses. We each kept our own accounts for personal spending. That was the agreement. What I noticed slowly was that the household account was always lower than it should have been. Not dramatically. Not enough that I could point to it and say, something is wrong. Just $20 here, $50 there. Small amounts that added up over months in a way that made me feel like I was going slightly crazy. I brought it up one evening after dinner. I had my laptop open, the bank statements pulled up, a very reasonable explanation he prepared. Adrian looked at the screen. He said his mother needed help with her car insurance. He said his sister had a rough month. He said he had mentioned it, actually, and I must have forgotten. He said it so calmly, so reasonably, that I found myself apologizing. I didn't forget. He had never mentioned it. That was the first time I understood that my memory could be made to feel unreliable in this house. The money continued to disappear in small amounts. When I pressed for details, the explanations were always just plausible enough to make me feel like the problem was my suspicion, not his behavior, his mother's property taxes, his sister's phone bill. Family looks after family, he said once, and the way he said it made very clear that I was adjacent to this family, not inside it. I started keeping a notebook. I know that sounds paranoid, but I had been made to feel crazy enough times that I needed to document what was real. I wrote down dates, amounts, what he said, what actually happened. I kept it in my locker at work. At home I kept smiling. His sister and I had what I can only describe as a slow-motion conflict that lasted for years. It was never one big thing. It was 100 small things. She'd make a comment about dinner being too salty, and then look at Adrian to see if he agreed. She'd suggest, casually, that maybe I was working too many hours. She once told me that Adrian was a homebody at heart, and that she worried he wasn't happy, and she said it with this tone of deep concern, like she was doing me a favor by telling me. I thanked her. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 5 minutes. Adrian never defended me. He would smooth things over afterward. She didn't mean it like that, or that's just how she is. But he never, ever told her to stop. I asked him to, more than once. He would look pained and say he'd talk to her, he never did. The mug incident happened on a Sunday afternoon about 4.5 years into our marriage. His sister had come over. She usually came over without asking first, and Adrian had stopped mentioning it to me in advance because he knew I found it stressful. We were in the kitchen. She said something about how I had apparently told a mutual friend that she was a lot to deal with, which I had in fact said, in a private conversation to my own friend, who had apparently reported back. I told her I was sorry if that got back to her, and I meant it. She picked up the ceramic mug I had just filled with tea and threw it. It hit the cabinet about 4 inches from my head and shattered. Adrian came in from the living room. He looked at the mess. He looked at me. He looked at his sister. He asked her if she was okay. I stood in my own kitchen with tea and ceramic pieces on the floor, and my husband looked past me to check on the person who had just thrown something at my head. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I went very still and very quiet, and something inside me settled into a kind of cold, clear certainty. I was done. I just needed a plan. I want to be honest about why I didn't leave immediately, because I know that's what some people wonder. I had a mortgage in both our names. I had a joint account that he had access to. I had watched, over 7 years, how Adrian handled conflict, calmly, with total confidence, in a way that always made me feel like I was the unreasonable one. I knew that if I just walked out, he would manage the narrative. He would tell his family, his friends, anyone who would listen, that I had been difficult, that I had been cold, that I had overreacted to something small, and part of me, the part that had been gaslit for 7 years, was genuinely not sure anyone would believe me. So I didn't leave that day. I cleaned up the ceramic pieces. I made dinner. I acted like everything was fine, but I started making plans. The first call I made was to a family lawyer here in Hamilton. I booked the appointment during my lunch break, paid with my personal card, got the receipt sent to my work email. She walked me through everything clearly. My rights regarding the matrimonial home, how assets would be divided, what I needed to document. She told me to keep records of financial transactions. She told me not to move any money or make any major changes until we had a strategy. She said, the goal is to make sure you leave with what you're entitled to, and that you do it in a way that's legally airtight. I already had 7 months of bank records in a file on my laptop at work. I brought them to the second appointment. I also quietly started moving a portion of my paycheck into a savings account that Adrian didn't know about. My salary went into my personal account, which he technically had visibility of through our shared banking app, so I opened a new account at a different institution entirely. My lawyer advised me to keep the amounts modest and consistent so they looked like regular personal expenses. Every 2 weeks. A transfer. Small enough not to be alarming. Large enough to matter, I told no one. Not my sister. Not my closest friend from work. I had learned, through the mug incident and through years before it, that information had a way of traveling in unexpected directions. I kept my own counsel for the first time in years, and it felt, surprisingly, like strength. About 8 months after I began planning, my lawyer told me it was time to think about the house. In Ontario, the matrimonial home is treated differently from other assets. Both spouses have equal right to possession, regardless of whose name is on the title. The way we were going to handle it was this: Adrian would be required to either buy out my share or agree to sell. Given what I knew about his finances, he had never been good with money, and I had been quietly tracking what he spent. I was fairly confident he couldn't afford a buyout. We would sell. I arranged a real estate agent through a referral from my lawyer's office. Someone discreet and efficient. We had a quiet conversation about the market, about timing, about what I could expect. She told me houses in our neighborhood were moving within 3 weeks of listing. I nodded and thanked her and drove home and made dinner, and told Adrian his mother had called while he was at the gym. He said, "Did she leave a message?" I said no, she hadn't called. But I needed to hear myself lie smoothly. I needed to know I could do it. I could. There's a moment in any long, slow situation where the pace suddenly changes, where all the quiet playing stops being abstract and becomes real. Mine came on a Wednesday morning in March. Adrian had left for work early. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee when I got a text from my lawyer. The financial disclosure documents were ready for him to be served. It was time. I sat there for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Snow on the ground outside, gray sky, the neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the street. 7 years of my life in that house. I looked at the walls I had painted, the curtains I had chosen, the small succulent on the windowsill that had somehow survived everything. I took a picture of the succulent. Then I finished my coffee and drove to work. Adrian was served the documents at his office at 11:15 that morning. I know this because my lawyer texted me when it was confirmed. He called me 23 times between 11:15 and 12:30. I let it go to voicemail. I was in a meeting with a client about Q1 projections, and I stayed completely focused on the subbridge shoot in front of me because I am very good at my job, and because falling apart was not something I was going to do at work. He came home that evening, and I was already there, sitting at the kitchen table. Not because I was waiting for him dramatically. I just happened to be home first. He walked in and he looked at me, and his face was doing something I had never seen it do before. He looked genuinely shocked, not angry. Shocked. Like he had genuinely not seen this coming. "What is this?" he said. "You've been served," I said. "There are documents. My lawyer can answer any questions you have. You went to a lawyer without talking to me, and I thought you threw a mug at my head and asked if she was okay. I thought. 7 years. I thought the notebook." I said, "I think we both know this has been coming for a long time." He did the thing he always did. He got very calm, very reasonable. He sat down across from me and folded his hands and said he thought we should talk, that he thought we could work through this, that he was willing to try counseling, that he had clearly let some things slide and he was ready to take responsibility for that. It was the most coherent I had ever heard him be about our problems. 4 years too late. I told him I had already made my decision and I would appreciate it if all further communication went through our lawyers. Then I got up and went to the guest bedroom. I had already moved some of my things in there 2 days prior, and I closed the door. He knocked once quietly. I didn't answer. What happened over the next 3 months was unpleasant in the specific, grinding way that legal processes are. His lawyer tried several things. There was an attempt to argue that some of the savings in my personal account were marital assets. My lawyer dismantled this efficiently, using the records I had kept. There was an attempt to delay the listing of the house. My lawyer filed a motion. The listing proceeded. His sister called me twice. I didn't pick up. She texted me once, a long message about family and forgiveness and how this isn't what Adrian needs right now. I read it and didn't respond. I noticed she didn't mention what I needed. I noticed she never had. His mother called my mother. My mother called me. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with my mother explaining the situation as calmly as I could, which took most of the patience I had left that week. My mother, to her enormous credit, said at the end, "I always thought that household had a strange energy." I laughed for the first time in weeks. The house sold in 18 days. We cleared enough that after the mortgage was paid out and the proceeds split according to our agreement, I walked away with enough for a solid down payment on something of my own. My lawyer called it a clean outcome. I sat in my car in the parking lot of her office and cried for about 12 minutes. Not from sadness. Exactly. Something more like release. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Guelph while I figured out next steps. My sister helped me move. She had not known anything about the plan. I had told her only that things had been bad for a long time, which she already suspected. When she carried the last box up the stairs and we sat on the floor of my empty new living room eating pizza, she said, "You seem different." I asked her different how. She thought about it. "Like yourself," she said. "Like you again." I didn't know how to explain to her what it feels like to spend 7 years slowly becoming someone else's supporting character, and then suddenly, abruptly, become the main character of your own life again. It's disorienting in the best possible way. Adrian, to his enormous misfortune, had been quietly relying on my income, my organization, my planning, my diligence with finances, far more than he had ever acknowledged or probably even recognized. Within 4 months of our separation, he had missed 2 mortgage payments on the new place he had rented. His credit score took a hit. He had apparently expected his mother to help him financially, and she was, it turned out, not in the position to do so that he had assumed. He had to get a roommate at 36. His sister had to go back to work for the first time in 3 years. This I heard from a mutual friend and I felt, I want to be precise about this. Genuinely nothing about it either way. I had spent so many years being made to feel guilty about things that weren't my fault. I had no emotional energy left for someone else's consequences. My lawyer did one more thing that I hadn't expected. When Adrian's lawyer tried a last-minute motion to revisit the asset division, arguing that my hidden savings account demonstrated bad faith, my lawyer filed a comprehensive financial history of our marriage. Every transaction, every unexplained withdrawal, every transfer to his mother and his sister from our joint account, and submitted it to the court. The motion was dismissed. The judge noted that the financial record showed a consistent pattern of marital funds being directed outside the household without mutual agreement. Adrian called me the night after that decision, just once. I picked up. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know it was that bad." And I believed him. That was the saddest part of all of it. That he genuinely had not noticed. That he had been so accustomed to me absorbing everything, smoothing everything over, managing everything quietly, that the absence of a problem had looked to him like the absence of a problem. He had never had to look at what was holding things together, because I had been holding things together and I had been very good at making it look effortless. I know, I said. Then I said goodbye and I hung up, and I didn't call back. That was 14 months ago. I bought a small house in Guelph in November, 2 bedrooms, a little backyard with an old apple tree, about 20 minutes from my sister. I made the offer on my own. I signed the papers on my own. I picked up the keys on a Tuesday morning and drove straight there from the lawyer's office and sat in the empty living room on the floor with a coffee and just listened to how quiet it was. No one calling in from another room, no one's opinion about my furniture, no one to ask if breakfast was ready. Just mine. I repotted the succulent a few weeks ago. It's doing better than ever, actually. Apparently, it just needed more light. I put it in the window above the kitchen sink where the afternoon sun comes through, and every morning when I'm making coffee, I look at it and think about the picture I took the morning everything changed. I kept the notebook, too. I don't read it anymore. But I kept it. Not as evidence, not as a reminder. Just because it was the first time in years I trusted myself enough to write things down. The first time I believed my own version of events, more than I believed someone else's. And that felt like something worth keeping.